Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Tuesday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser here with our Tuesday podcast. Hope everybody's doing well. Before it was about staying not too hot. Now it seems like we've hit our rainy season. We had a quieter April than we normally have rain-wise, and most of May was quiet, but it appears like over the last week or so, rain's come in abundance. And in fact, we had our first storm watch that they're thinking that there could be some kind of significant storm activity somewhere in Florida by the weekend. And the forecast for Orlando this week is to have a lot of rain all the days and probably in the afternoon. So keep your umbrellas handy, and at least it's good for the lawns. So today, I'll start off with the NBA basketball championships are starting Thursday. Indiana closed out the Knicks the other night, so now the NBA championships will be the Indiana Pacers against the Oklahoma City Thunder. And it should be a very entertaining series. I believe the first game is this coming Thursday evening. The first two games will be at Oklahoma City. I'm anticipating it'll be a very entertaining series. But as I've mentioned previously, I do think Oklahoma City is one of the best teams we've seen in a number of years. And I feel they will beat Indiana within 5 or 6 games. So anyway, if you're a basketball fan, it should be fun to watch. Transitioning to real estate, what is going on in real estate? Well, you've probably, if you read or see a lot of the news, the real estate market's in a bit of a transition now, not only locally in Florida, but in a lot of the United States. We've been in a strong seller's market for over 10 years now, where, especially in our area, prices have really been a continual upsurge since 2012 and really didn't kind of flatten out until last year, 2024. All of a sudden this year in 2025, especially in the last 4 weeks, we're seeing a couple definitive patterns. Number one, as I've mentioned, we're starting to see a fair amount of listing activity relative to what we had. So that's really a good thing for buyers because, one of the complaints we receive from buyers are that we didn't have enough of a selection of inventory in the popular areas such as Hunters Creek, Lake Nona, Dr. Phillips, the areas that I focus a lot on that people seek out. But the second thing, which has kind of magnified all these trends, is normally our busiest time of the year is the spring-summer season. So we normally define that as starting around Easter, and then our peak season goes from Easter really until the end of July. So April, May, June, and July, those 4 months, we tend to be appreciably busier, and we have a lot more homes that go under contract. And that's the trend regardless of business. And what I mean by that is whether we're in a really strong market where it's favoring sellers a lot, or even if we're in a neutral or a market that's favoring buyers, we'll still see a lot more activity in those months, and we'll still see a lot more homes go under contract in those months that went under contract prior to then. And I've seen that for years and years. So regardless of how good or bad the year was up to that date, we always definitely see a big boost in business for that 4-month period. This year appears to me, not only from what I observe in my personal business, but also from staying abreast of the trends both in Florida and throughout the United States, that trend is a lot less significant now. We're definitely not seeing the huge increase in contracts and buyer activity this time of the year that we normally have. In fact, I carefully track, of course, not only how many sales I make and how many sales are generated in the market, but what type of activity are we getting? In other words, how many showings are we getting? How long does it take to sell a nice listing? And how many buyers does it take through the house to get a solid contract? And I have a lot of analytic information that I've been accumulating for years, so I kind of can get a sixth sense on this in addition to the analytics. Well, this year I definitely can sense, and the analytics correlate this, that we're not getting anywhere near the increase that we normally do. So obviously, besides being a little concerning, it's very unusual because even I've been in business for a lot longer than the 15 years that I referenced that we've been on a price upsurge. But even in unusual years, you always felt that these months were busier. Hopefully, this is a short-term trend, but there are some factors that definitely have an influence on this. The interest rates, as we've talked about, they're staying very flat right now between approximately 6.5% and 7% on a fixed rate mortgage. So when you compare that to where the interest rates were a couple years ago, it's a huge increase. And of course, it affects not only the buying power of consumers, but also if somebody is having to sell a home to buy a home, which is pretty commonplace for a certain percentage of people that are buying, they're having a harder time do that because they might be sitting in a home that they bought 5 or 6 years ago that had a 3% interest rate, maybe even a little bit less depending on how their timing was with the purchase. And now they're looking at an interest rate for their next purchase of 6.5% or 7%. So their interest rate is over double, and of course their payment is way higher. So for some consumers, even the ones that can afford whatever, in other words, they can still buy what they want to buy, it's still something that they have to really give serious thought to and see if they're comfortable with that, because psychologically, not only is it a much more significant house payment, but just psychologically, you're going from a house where you probably had a pretty low payment because you had this low interest rate, and now you're going to a much higher interest rate, which of course makes your payment much higher. So I know that some people, due to this, are holding off, and I understand that. There's pros and cons with that mentality, in the sense that this might be a better time to buy, and then when interest rates do ultimately come down, you can always refinance the house. But everybody has their own comfort level. So all I can do is lay out options for people. When they ask for my opinion, I give it to them. But at the end of the day, they have to feel good about what they're doing. And then the other factor that we have, which is unusual, is so much uncertainty with our government. As I've mentioned, we've got some extreme planning going on. We're seeing kind of the axe effect as opposed to the tweaking effect, meaning that we're getting these dramatic changes with no transition. Now we're supposedly going back to this huge tariff increase with China. We were doing a huge increase, then we backed off of it a little bit, and now we're talking about going back to it, especially with aluminum and steel. which are obviously two components in construction and a lot of different products that you buy, appliances and such. So it's a huge deal. And so a lot of people are very uneasy with that. And there's really no way, from my perspective, to tell people that I have a better understanding of how our government's functioning than they do. It's hard to predict. When we had more traditional government, you might agree or disagree with our current administration in terms of their philosophies and viewpoints, but you at least could anticipate what direction they were going to go in and how they were transitioning to whatever their point of view is without going from A to Z in 30 seconds. Now you can't say that because we just have a very unpredictable situation. And, you hear this in other fields too, to do with these extreme changes in education, our healthcare system. Now they're telling people if you're traveling internationally and you haven't had measles vaccine, you need to get the vaccine ASAP and you need to go on a 2-dose regimen because they're starting to slowly see an increase in measles activity. And once they get to a certain level, then that's going to increase by a much quicker rate. So it is a cause of concern for a lot of people. So we just have a lot of unusual and unpredictable things going on right now. The cost of food in many cases is going up quite a bit. I know when you go to the grocery store, probably if you compare your grocery bill to what you were paying a few years ago, it's significantly higher right now. And then you're starting to see a few supply issues. You don't always see everything in stock that you're used to seeing. So it's just a unique situation right now. And everybody has to adapt. We don't have any choice, of course. And it doesn't really any good to stress about it, but you can't put your head in the sand and not acknowledge that we are going through some unusual circumstances. So we'll just have to wait and see how real estate performs during this transitional period. I'm still of the opinion that we're just getting a delayed reaction with buyer activity this year, just because it's hard for me to foresee that the number of transactions will decrease that significantly this year, even in spite of these things. I do think it's pretty obvious that pricing on what I call an average home is definitely flattened out and may even decrease a little bit. I kind of define real estate into 3 tiers. Those are tiers 1, 2, and 3. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll start off with the lowest number. Tier 1 are houses more in disarray. They're houses that need a lot of work. Maybe they're distressed properties. They're people that just are bailing out in some cases. And those are the houses that all the investors are always looking for. They're always looking to buy those. They're hoping to pay 30 to 40% below market value. And many of those are fix and flip customers. They go in and get what they consider to be an excellent value for themselves. And then they put in some money into the house to update it. And of course, they all have budgets, so and they all have teams of renovators. So they can usually, depending on the neighborhood that they're buying in, they spend proportionately to what that neighborhood is, meaning that if they buy in a more expensive neighborhood, they're going to invest more money in the house because the ultimate resale value is going to be more significant, and the people that buy in that neighborhood are going to expect more quality. If they buy in a more average area, they're still going to have to put some improvements in the house, but then they're going to put more of the basics. They're going to put paint in the house. Depending on the house, they may change the flooring. Maybe they'll put in new countertops. They might put hardware into the sinks and things of that nature. Those type of things will make a house look better, but they're not going to be as costly. So everything is predicated on return on investment. And so these fix and flippers, they know what kind of return they're expecting and how quickly they want to move the house so they don't have their money tied up. Then we're going to jump to Tier 3 houses. Well, what are Tier 3 houses? Well, Tier 3 houses are the houses that are in superior condition, frequently in the more sought-after communities. And these Tier 3 houses, they've been updated significantly with quality improvements. So the theory for a lot of buyers on a Tier 3 house is they're in move-in condition. They've had very good quality improvements put into the house. So the buyers of these houses are the kind of buyers that'll pay a higher price, but they want to move into a house that is in move-in ready condition where the new owner has to put very little, if anything, into the house. And those type of buyers are basically predicated on a couple of factors. Number one, they're predicated on lifestyle. In other words, they don't want to have to worry about making improvements to houses. They lead busy lives. If it's a couple, they both work. They want their free time to be doing other things than improving their house. And then you have another set of folks that are more what I call demographically oriented. And these would be pretty much the age group of probably 25 to 40. They're kind of accustomed because a lot of parents of the baby boomers, et cetera, made life a little easier for their kids. So their kids are used to a higher quality of living. And so what I call the Tier 2 houses, which are more the average house, meaning that, they're in pretty decent neighborhoods. I mean, neighborhoods that you wouldn't be fearful of living in. And the houses are typical, what I would call, for lack of a better generic term, middle-class houses. The houses have been maintained well, but they haven't been updated significantly. So those are the houses that we're finding right now with all these variables and different age groups of consumers and stuff. Those are the houses that are suffering more right now. Those are the houses that in a really strong market, we're still selling quickly and for a premium. But now, because of the changing market and the changing demographics, the Tier 2 houses are the ones that are sitting more. They're not going as quickly. The sellers are having to negotiate more off the asking price. So for those buyers, they're getting a little bit better value, and they understand that if they want to get the house up to their taste, they're going to have to do some improvements in the house. So there's not enough Tier 3 houses where they're in move-in shape. So the Tier 2 houses have that longer sitting period and have to negotiate more because there's less buyers for the Tier 2 houses. But there's a definite pattern in these tiers. And if you're a buyer, you know exactly what I'm talking about because I'm sure you've looked at Tier 3 houses or Tier 2 houses. And if you're a seller and you're getting some opinions from skilled, experienced brokers, and you have what I would call the Tier 2 houses, they may be coming in with a little lower price recommendation than you were expecting. The other alternative, of course, if you have a Tier 2 house, is to do the improvements before you put the house for sale. But of course, that's a little riskier. Not everybody wants to do that. Not every seller wants to invest a bunch of money just for the purpose of putting their house for sale. And the reason they don't do this is they feel to themselves, well, I've lived in the house 5 or 10 years. I didn't spend money on it, so I'm not going to put all these new things in for the next buyer. Or they may not have the money. They may not want to come up with that money to put into their current house because they're possibly looking to buy another house, and money, they need to keep their money for down payment purposes and to help them qualify, etc. So we're kind of in a unique category of things. So what does all this mean? Well, it requires more analysis. You really have to put a little bit more thought. You have to get better educated. You have to get better counsel. And then you have to come up with a strategy that's going to be best suited to your budget, your taste, your lifestyle, and the timing that you want to adhere to. Whether you want to move before school starts, whether you want to move into a certain size home, depending on if your family size is going to increase. Maybe your parents are getting at the age where you're thinking of having your parents move in with you. Maybe you have adult children that are in their 20s that are having problems finding jobs because the job market's a little tighter, so they might be moving home with you, which you didn't expect. So there's just a lot of different reasons. So it requires a lot more analysis. So I hope I've given you some food for thought. My next podcast, I will take a little different direction, and I'll be a little bit more solution oriented. So that's all for today. Have a great rest of the week. Stay dry. This is Marty Kaiser out.